felt my soul lift out of my body again. And that pure love came back. And I thought, okay, I've completed whatever it is I'm supposed to do here, and I can go home again. I'm leaving my body. I can feel myself leaving. And so she held my hand and she was crying. And I lifted about 5 feet off the bed, and I could feel the room fill with thousands of souls, angels, guides, family. It was just pure love. And then I was told this will be the last time that I would be able to leave my body.
Still have questions? Well, join me live for Wake Up Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll answer your questions, and you might see a familiar face. Together, we're waking up the collective. Thank you for watching. My guest today is Heather Vandermeyden, who had a near-death experience. So Heather, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. This is going to be exciting.
It is going to be exciting. I love these conversations. And of course, you have a couple of elements to yours that are a little bit different, which I always love to explore. So I'm just going to let you start at the beginning. So why don't you share with us how you had your near-death experience and all the details, and then we'll ask questions.
For sure. So mine started with an autoimmune disorder. It's called ulcerative colitis. When I was about 19, I just became sick overnight, and I'd been really healthy, and I was young, like prime of my life. And so I really didn't appreciate how sick I was for quite a while. So for about a year, I was seeing doctors trying to get healthier, trying to put it into remission, and it wasn't working. And one day I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table, just visiting them, and I heard a voice say, "You're going to die, but you're going to be okay." And it kind of freaked me out. Because I couldn't see anyone in the room, I was by myself. And I thought, where is this voice coming from? But I also felt like it was a familiar voice and like I could trust it. And I felt safe with the voice. And so that's when I started preparing for my death. But because I was in denial that I was so sick, I thought it was going to be from a car accident. And I remember sitting there thinking, okay, I wonder how the car is going to hit me. Like, is it going to be my fault? How's my family going to react? And I just waited for the car to hit me. As the weeks went on, it wasn't happening, but I was sure that was how it was going to happen. And as that was happening, I was getting sicker and sicker to where I was down to 94 pounds. I quit. I couldn't eat. I started just living on rice baby cereal and applesauce and broth. And as I got sicker and sicker, I started going in and out of the hospital, and I started passing out. I was blacking out constantly. I was so malnourished. And so my fevers were really high. And at that point, my surgeon said, we probably need to do surgery and remove your large intestine. It's not functioning and it's making you sick and you're probably going to die. And I was, again, 19, and I'm thinking, I don't want a scar on my stomach. I was kind of vain. I was scared of surgery. I'd never had any surgeries before. And I thought this just doesn't work with my life. And so I kept putting it off. And I was on really high doses of prednisone, steroids, and a bunch of other really heavy duty medications, and they weren't working. And as I got sicker and sicker, my fevers were high constantly. Like I had a month of 104, 105-degree fevers. And I kept telling everyone I was fine, but I think deep down I knew I wasn't fine, but I was so scared. And so eventually I ended up in the hospital. I had been there a couple of times that month, and the doctor kept me. And I had gone in for a fever, and my surgeon had been in contact with the hospital and said, if she shows up again, keep her and we'll do surgery. So I was telling the surgeon, I'm okay, I'm fine, it's just a fever. Give me some antibiotics, send me home. And he kept me, and it saved my life. At the time, I was really upset, but I appreciate it now. So that was December 20th of 1999. And on the 23rd, they'd run some tests and said, we need to do surgery as soon as possible to remove my large intestine. And the plan was a 2 or 3-part surgery. Basically, what they do is they remove your large intestine, they give you a colostomy bag until your body heals, and then they remove that and they take your small intestine and loop it into a J loop at the bottom, and that becomes your large intestine. And then you don't need a large, you just got the small intestine with the J pouch. Great stuff. But there was the first surgery went good, and I remember coming out of surgery, I was scared going in. I thought, what if they hurt me, or what if I die? but still thinking that I was going to die in a car accident. I didn't think I'd die from surgery. But they did the surgery and it went really well. And, I was recovering on New Year's Eve. I, I remember it was Y2K and my family was there. We were kind of nervous because the machines, we were afraid they'd shut down. And I was still recovering. I had an 8-inch incision on my stomach and I couldn't really sit up on my own or anything. And 2 nurses came in to check my vitals and I felt my body, what it felt like rising off the bed. I was laying down, but it felt like I was floating off the bed. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is really weird. I'm looking around, seeing if they're lifting the bed, and the bed obviously was not being lifted that high. It was up to like here on the nurse's shoulders. And they checked my vitals, and they left. And slowly my body started floating down, and I was so confused. And so my family hadn't noticed, and I thought, okay, you're losing it. And I wasn't on any narcotics at this point. I really hate narcotics, and I hated using them in the hospital. I had a morphine pump, and they would actually have to use it, like push the pump for me because I wouldn't use it. So I wasn't under the influence of anything at this point. So Y2K happened. The machines did not shut down, luckily, and I was okay. And then a couple of days later, on the third, my doctor came to check on me. And it was like the first day that I'd been able to eat. I had a feeding tube, and I'm getting ready to eat this piece of toast, and he like checks my stomach, and he literally takes the toast out of my hands and says, "We need to do surgery." And I'm like, I'm starving. I just want this toast. And then I start crying, and I look down, and my stomach had opened up, and my small intestine was in my colostomy bag. So the doctor calls my mom and said, "Can you get to the hospital right away? We're going to do surgery like immediately." My mom worked close by. So she called the family, and they came and they did the surgery, put my stomach back in, and I was fine. A week later, it happened again. At this point, I'm really weak. I weigh 94 pounds, maybe even 90 at this point. And this will be my third major surgery, and my body could not handle it. I'd been sick for so long and so malnourished that I was just too weak for another major surgery. So when they took me out of the surgery, I started developing breathing problems, and it's called ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome. Your lungs basically fill with fluid and you suffocate to death. So it was scary. On top of that, I developed sepsis throughout my entire body, especially inner abdominal sepsis. So my stomach was just full of sepsis. And I felt like I was not able to breathe. It felt like it was pumping in and out so heavily that felt like an elephant was on my chest. It was really scary. So they said to my family, clear the room. And there were about 6 to 8 nurses. But as they were clearing the room, my dad was there, and he heard a voice say Craig, which is his name. And he didn't know any of the nurses. I had been moved to shock trauma, and they weren't my regular nurses. So he looked around the room and he said yes, and didn't see anyone there. And he actually kept a journal when I was at the hospital. And he wrote in there that he knew that the voice was not of this world. And my dad's not a really feelings type person. So when he says stuff like that, you take it for the worth that was probably really confusing to him to not know what was going on, but he knew that it wasn't anyone in the room. So my family went out into the waiting room, and the next thing I know, I'm in a hospital bed being pushed down the hallway, and they're screaming, "Move out of the way." They thought I died. What was happening is they were needing to resuscitate me and ventilate me. And so the next thing I remember, I don't remember in the hallway, I just remember being in the room. And the next thing I know, I'm in a different room, and I'm sitting on these cement stadium type seats. And off to my right is a nurse's desk, and they're busy. They're not watching me. They're not talking to me. And it didn't concern me that they didn't see me there. And then I looked off to my left, and there was a hospital bed with a young girl on there. And it's kind of like her chest was rising. You could tell that there was some breathing problems. And there was nurses all around, and they were trying their hardest to stabilize her, resuscitate her, whatever they were doing. And I thought, this is interesting. So I watched for about 5 minutes, not knowing who this person was. I didn't feel any connection. I didn't know who she was. It felt like I was watching a movie. And then I started noticing that I could feel the emotions of the nurses. I could feel what the girl was thinking, and she was terrified. And then I noticed that there was so much love in this room, like this profound love. And I felt so safe and so peaceful. And I just sat and watched for a few minutes, and I realized suddenly that that girl was me. And it really, really just surprised me more than anything that's ever happened, because I didn't feel like that was me. I didn't recognize the body. I was me where I was outside of that body. It was really, really shocking. So the next thing I remember is waking up in a dark room, and my hands are tied to the bed, and there's something in my mouth, like a straw, like a big straw. And I am trying to move around, and I'm being told to put my hands down. And I've been trying to pull out the tubes every time I'd wake up. I was in and out as the anesthesia was wearing off. And that's when over the next 3 weeks, I started being able to leave my body just constantly. It was amazing. I wish I could still do it. Um, it was just incredible to be in that much pain, and to be able to just think about it and just leave your body was just such a gift. And the day it stopped, it was devastating. But one of the first experiences after that, I was asleep in my room. It was dark. I was kind of in and out. Every time the nurses walked by, I'd wake up. And so I was at this point awake watching the walls, and it was wintertime. And suddenly I felt this, like, it was like part of me just came out. My soul just left my body at such a fast pace, and I was in this black, dark tunnel, and I was moving so fast. And everything was dark. And then I looked, and there was a man who was kind of in front of me, and he had on a top hat and a dark suit with like the coattails. It looked like he's from the 1800s, and he had these dark, soulful eyes. I mean, you could just see forever with his eyes. He had really beautiful eyes. And he was very calming to me, but I didn't know who he was. And as we're shooting through what I feel like is like the speed of light, I'm panicked because I shouldn't be moving this fast. And he's not saying anything, but he's comforting. And every time I start to really panic, I pop back into my body. It's like I slam back into it. And this happens over and over again. And eventually it stops because the nurses sedate me because I'm not sleeping. It was about 3 days of time that this was happening. And I didn't know who that person was. And this was in 2000. So last year, my cousin, she'd watched one of my podcasts, and she emailed me and she said, I think I know who that is, and gave me the name of my great great grandfather and said, look him up. Our family does genealogy. Look him up and see if that's him. And so I did. And there's two pictures of him. In the second picture, I was like, oh my gosh, that is him. He didn't have the facial stubble, but it was his eyes. It was him. And I always said before I knew who it was that he looked like Abraham Lincoln. And if you look at him, he's very similar to what he looks like. They've kind of got the same small structure. But it was really cool to know after this many years who it was. And I didn't know him. He passed away way before I was born. And so the connection was very interesting to me because I had never heard his name. I didn't know much about him, but apparently he went to work one day and just never came home. They don't know what happened to him. So the first thing I do when I get up there again is I'm going to ask what happened, just kind of solve the family mystery. But um, after that experience, I was really, really sick because I was, full of sepsis, and I was getting sicker and sicker. So I developed 107.5-degree fever, and they're packing me in ice. They've got fans. They're trying to get the temperature down as fast as possible so I don't get brain damage. And I pop out of my body again, and I'm in front of this building, this tall, tall building. The door is just huge. There's pedestals in the front, kind of like an ancient building you'd see back in ancient times. And it's made of sandstone. And it looks like a typical building of, Jerusalem's time, but it had this energy about it that I knew I wanted to be inside of the building. And I could feel a male energy behind my right shoulder. And as I thought to myself, I want to be in that building, I was suddenly in the building. Like, I didn't walk through the door. And I still have all my earthly thoughts. And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I just popped into the building. And so I'm standing in the front, and I can see people sitting in chairs, reading books, and just soaking up knowledge. And then I found myself in a room that was round, and there was no ceiling. It felt like it went on forever. There was thousands of books. There were scrolls that were rolled up with thin ribbon. and beautiful woodwork. And this guide was with me, and he's showing me the scrolls with ancient symbols, and I'm understanding them, and I'm reading through the books. And then I was told when I left that room, I would leave the information behind. I wouldn't be able to take it with me. I wouldn't remember it. And I would love to know what were in those books and scrolls. It really bugs me that I don't know. But once we left that room, we ended up in the entrance again. And off to the right, there was a pedestal, like if you're at a speaking event. And I felt very drawn to it. And as I'm thinking, I need to be there, I just kind of start gliding across the room. And again, my earthly thoughts are like, wow, I can glide. This is so cool. And when I got to the pedestal, it moved to the left and there were stairs. And I just knew I had to be down there. So I start walking down these stairs. And in the basement type area, the ceilings were very, very tall. It didn't feel like a basement, but there were ponds and rivers and waterfalls and pools of water. It was just full of water. And there was all this light coming in through the very top of the ceiling. Towards the top, there were windows along the entire wall. They were letting in light, but there was no electricity, there was no plumbing, but it felt, again, very ancient. And the water was just welcoming me. And I thought, I need to be in this pool of water. So I went and sat in the water. And as I looked down, it went forever. And I am actually afraid of drowning. It's on my list of what I don't ever want to happen. But I felt really comfortable in the water. And I had my arms kind of behind me like this. And I looked down and my hair was really long and it was in the water, but it wasn't getting wet. And I thought, huh. I mean, all these thoughts are going through my head like, this is just the weirdest thing ever. But as I'm splashing the water back and forth with my hands, I suddenly know that this water is healing water. It just came to me like a download. And I knew that this water was going to help heal my body. And my guide was just sitting next to me on the ground. And I sat there for as long as I needed to. I watched different people in the water splashing in it, and I knew that the water was healing them as well. And out of all my experiences, this was my absolute favorite. I have a thing for water now. I love when I'm stressed being in a lake or a pool or the ocean because it was so healing to me. And over the next few days, I went there quite a few times. And it didn't automatically heal my body, but I do feel profoundly that it definitely helped keep me alive. And I think that when I was at my sickest, leaving my body was God's way of giving me a little gift of, you're in a lot of pain, but whenever I was out of my body, I just felt pure love. There was never any pain. There were never any worries. There was no feeling of time. It didn't exist. And so it was a gift to be able to leave when I needed to. So once back in my body, I was ventilated at the time, so I couldn't really talk. I couldn't write anything down because I had tons of machines on me. And so I wanted to tell my family what's happening, but I didn't have the skills available at that point. As I got sicker and sicker, I popped out of my body again and I found myself in this rectangular room, very tall, and it felt very soft. And I don't know how to use words for some of these experiences sometimes because I can see it in my mind, but it's hard to translate it. But it just felt soft. Like if you're in the clouds, like different areas of gold, there are different colors that just, it was very brightly lit, but there were no lights on the ceiling. And there was an older man and woman that were there. And they told me that they ministered to the patients, that they were sent to help heal them. And if the patients weren't going to survive, that they were to bring them back to God. And that if the patient wasn't going to survive, that God would show his face in a door that had a glass top on it. Like the top part of the door was glass. And so they asked if I wanted to go with them and administer to some of these patients. And it was fun to go to the different rooms because I kind of had gotten to know through stories of my family and the nurses of what what my different neighbors of the hospital were going through. One of them had the same condition I had, and he had actually been to visit me a couple of times. And so it was fun to go to these different rooms of shock trauma and see these angels at work. The people in the room obviously couldn't see them, but I truly believe that they could feel their presence and my presence because I've been in rooms since where someone's critically ill and I can feel that encompassing love that's given from the other side. And at one point we were in the room waiting and I'd asked them, and we were just having a conversation. I said, I'm not getting better. Like, I don't think I'm going to make it. I kept having setback after setback. They had done something wrong during one of the surgeries and I couldn't walk. My left side was basically paralyzed. So I was a pretty big mess. And I said, I don't think I'm gonna make it. I think I'm gonna die from this. And they said that before I'd come to this earth, I had made a soul contract with my brother that I would take on some of his extra struggles in this life. And that's why it was taking longer to heal, but that we had made this pact before we came here and that would help him in this life. And they showed me some scenes of that. And it was kind of interesting to know that. And I'm grateful that I got to see my brother on the other side. I'm really close to him in his life. And so at one point I did see God's face in the door. And I should probably say I was raised in a very strict religious household and I kind of pushed away from it. So when they would talk about the Bible and stuff, I would kind of blank out. I didn't want to hear it. So it really, really surprised me when I saw the face of God because I didn't expect it. But as soon as I saw him, I knew his energy and I knew that I had known him before and that he knew me. And I felt his love so strong. It was like being enveloped in a hug of your grandma that you had missed or your grandpa or going home again. It felt like home. And I just knew him that we had been together before this life, that he loved every one of us. I felt such intense love for every one of his children. It didn't matter who we were or what we had done in this life, he loved us. And he had this piercing, piercing blue eyes, but when you looked into his eyes, it was like you could see the entire universe and you could feel how ancient he was. It's like he held all the knowledge that was possible, but he also looked very young, if that makes sense. He looked very healthy and he was just, I always say he was beautiful. I mean, he's just this amazing energy. And if he was in a different physical form, I still would have recognized him because he had his own frequency of energy that I recognized. And I knew that the patient that we were working with was going to pass away at that point. And he was a young kid in his late teens, and he'd been in a car accident. And the angels put their hands on the shoulders of the family. And I could see the light going from the angels to the family. And I could feel the love. There was so much love that they were sending to this family. And I knew that as they escorted this young man home, that he was going to be taken care of and that he was going to be loved and that his family would be comforted. And that really meant a lot to me at that point because I really didn't think I was going to survive. I felt like at some point my body was just going to shut down and I was not going to make it. And I'd been actually asking to die. And my mom had been praying that it would happen because I was so sick and she hated seeing me suffer. And they didn't know if I'd ever come back from all of these medical crises. I ended up having 13 abdominal surgeries over a short period of time within a year. So I just being out of my body was a gift. Um, but at one point, my aunt who had passed away came to the room and asked if I wanted to see my uncle at her house, and my uncle was still alive. And we went there, and she showed me that he was going to pass away in the hallway, and that there would be no one there to help him up, and he would die from those injuries. And I remember being really upset about it because I could feel how scared he was, and I didn't like that he was alone when it happened. And so I went back to my body and I told my family 3 days later when I was finally able to write it down. I had a really hard time communicating still. And I said, go check on him. Basically, I just gave his name and I was pointing at it, and they knew that I was worried about him. So my grandpa went and checked on him, and he was fine. And then about 15 years later, I got a call from my mom that he'd fallen in the hallway and he'd passed from his injuries. And it was different for me because I know that time doesn't exist on the other side. And so it was a validation for one thing for my family. I told them all of the experiences. So it validated that time doesn't exist. But it also gave me that knowledge that he was not alone when he passed, that my aunt was most definitely there to take him home, and that she wasn't the only one there for him, that he was surrounded by his loved ones. And so it gave me a comfort to know that when we do pass on, we're not alone and we are loved. And there are so many angels and whatever you want to call them, guides, family members on the other side that are there waiting for us to bring us back home. So we're never alone. And I think in this life we feel alone a lot of the time, but we aren't. Sometimes we just need to go through experiences that are hard, trials, because they build us up in a way that we need in this life. I had two children that kept coming to the foot of the bed, and I would tell my mom, there's the kids again. And she's like, what? I'd say, don't you see them? They're right there. And she's like, I don't see any kids. And sometimes they come with an older man. And it became a joke because they were there for over a week on and off. And I obviously have dark hair. My husband at the time had dark hair, darker skin. And these kids were very, very blonde. And one of them had curly hair. And at that point, I had straight hair. It did fall out later on in the hospital and it came back in curly, which was fun. But I didn't know who they were. And I did find out later who they were a couple years later. They were actually two of my foster children that we adopted. And that was really cool to see them the first time and know that those babies that they'd known me before this life and they were meant to come into my life. And so out of the 25 kids that we fostered, those are the only two that we adopted. And I knew as soon as I saw these babies that, these were the ones that were in the hospital. My son was 22 months old when I got the call for him. And my daughter was 11 weeks old. And when I saw them in the hospital, they were about 10 and 6, so a little bit older. But my son has very, very curly hair, and you can't miss it. I mean, he was just gorgeous little baby with blonde, long curls. So that was really cool to see a couple years after those kids, they knew me before this life. It's just it still kind of shocks me to this day. We'll make little jokes about it. Like when they're being naughty or something, I'll say, well, you're stuck with me or I'm stuck with you. But in the hospital, I was not recovering. Everything that could go wrong was going wrong. And at one point, I found myself over a field of green, beautiful grass. And there were two tents down there. There was two oak trees, and the grass was swaying in the breeze. And if you ever have been on the other side, the music there, I don't know how to explain it. It's like this frequency of love and healing, and it's just it's gorgeous. Everything had music to it, and everything had a healing vibration. And the grass, like each blade was alive. Everything was alive with love. And I had my guide with me, and I wanted to be down in these tents to see what they were. And as I thought that, we kind of floated down to the tents, and there were doctors. They were obviously working on something very important. They had huge medical books. They had petri dishes, just everything, working at a fast rate of speed. And my guide said, they don't know how to heal you. It's through faith and prayer alone that you will survive. And I truly, truly believe that. I believe in prayer. It doesn't matter what religious aspect you are, or if you aren't religious. I think that prayer is very, very important. And I know that when my doctor would go in for surgeries, he would tell my family, I don't know how to save her. I'll figure it out when I get in there. And I'm sure he learned a lot from my issues. They always had like 10 to 12 residents in the room checking me out because it was such a weird medical situation. So I do feel that when I was in surgery that the doctor's hands were guided by those on the other side to help him make the right decisions for my care. I had a 4% chance to survive. And considering everything I went through, I think I'm pretty healthy. I was able to make an amazing recovery, but again, it took a long time to get better. At one point, I found myself in my grandparents' backyard, and my grandma had passed away, and she'd been around a lot during my NDEs. I had a really close relationship with her in life, and so she was around a lot. And I would tell my family I was with grandma again. So they knew stuff was happening around me. But I looked into the back of our yard, and it was dark at night, and there were stars everywhere in the sky, and it was very almost like being in a snow globe is what it felt like. It just felt very contained and quiet. And suddenly orbs start dancing from the right to the left across the backyard, one after another. They were different sizes. And they were filled with like, I've always explained it as like a lava lamp, like the glitter inside of it. But I talked to someone the other day that had an NDE, and he said it's almost like static energy. And I thought that actually makes more sense. It was like this static, like glitter and just very energetic. And three of the orbs had faces in them. One was my grandma, one was her father, my great grandfather, who was also very close, and then one was my aunt who had taken me to her house. And as they passed by in these orbs, they looked very, very healthy. It was just their faces, but they looked so young and healthy. And my great grandfather had been 94 when he passed away. And he looked so healthy that he could have ran a race and beat me, even if I was healthy. But they looked so healthy. And I thought, this is incredible that they're around me. I mean, every time I'd see them, I would just get this hug of love and think, I'm not alone. Because I felt that I was going to live in the hospital forever. I didn't ever think I was going to go home. I'd only been married for like probably a year and a half at this point. And I would think, what happens if I die? I'm leaving this husband behind who does not know how to pay bills. He's floundering without me. And at one point, I'd actually been in my bed, and it was kind of later towards the evening. And suddenly I popped out and I was flying over the city. And again, my earthly thoughts, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can fly. Best thing ever. And I ended up in the top of my living room. I had a split level house. You'd walk in and you could go either upstairs or downstairs. And I was above the door, kind of floating up there. And I saw our two cats at the top of the stairs. And my first thought was, okay, he's feeding them. They're good. And then I heard my guide's voice say, do you want to see your husband? I said, okay. And I'm suddenly floating down the hallway towards the bedroom. And I can see him laying in bed. He's asleep. He's on his side. And he had his blankets wrapped around him. And I thought, okay, he's safe. And then I heard my guide say, your nurse is coming back. You need to go back to your body. And I popped back into my body. I didn't fly over the city again. And that was a really large gift to me because I truly felt like I was going to never be able to go home again. And seeing that my home was still there, that my my house was the same, my husband was there, my cats, it gave me this push that I needed to survive and I needed to fight. And every day they'd come in and say, it's time to walk. And I hated it. I would just cry. I was in so much pain. I had an 8-inch incision that was left open because it kept shredding during surgery. And so every time they'd get me up with all the machines, it was just this hassle. And I was so tired. And I'd think, just kill me. Just let me die. But I knew I needed to fight. And if I didn't, I wasn't going to make it. And I knew that I'm stubborn and independent enough that I did not want to be in a position where I was in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. I was 20. I still had a life ahead of me. And I wanted that choice and that chance to live a healthy life. So they'd put me on these machines to, you'd sit on it and you'd try to move your legs like it was a bicycle that was kind of on the ground. And if I could get my foot, just one time, like spin one time, I would think this is amazing. I'm getting there. So there was a lot of physical therapy involved. And I thought, maybe there is a chance I can get out of here. But at one point, my nurse sat me up to walk, and he put his hands on my shoulders like this, kind of to hold me in place for a minute to sit while he got the machines ready. And suddenly I was behind his body, and I was in a hallway with all these oval-shaped windows. And I was watching him and my mom, and I was like, oh, yay, I'm out of my body. This is great. I'm not going to go back. Because it had become a game to me. I could just kind of pop in and out when my family wasn't watching. And I didn't know if they understood, but they told me later, my husband told me that I would go completely still and I wasn't moving. And suddenly I'd pop like that and I would be very confused where I was. But as I watched the nurse, he's holding his hand, one hand on my shoulder, and he's snapping his fingers in my face, saying, Heather, Heather, come back, come back. And I'm kind of laughing to myself, thinking, I'm going to stay here. But then I could suddenly feel his thoughts, and he was terrified that I was going to die on his watch. And my mom was in the room, and she was fully freaking out about it. And as I looked at my body, I wasn't moving. My eyes weren't moving. I wasn't breathing. And so I said to my guide, who was always there with me, I said, I'll pop in for a few minutes, but I'm going to come out later. And so I popped back into my body, and my nurse said, oh, we lost you there for a minute. And I was thinking, like I'm going to do it again. So they were fully aware of what was happening around me. I don't know if they understood how close I was to, going in and out. But every time I left, I felt that peace again. When I was in my body, I was constantly worried about how much my medical bills were, or, if my husband was paying the utilities and the mortgage. There's a lot of worry or, how I was going to survive. But whenever I was out of my body, I didn't have any of my earthly worries. I just felt peace and love, and I felt like I was home. I felt more me than I ever did in my body. And I cherished every moment of being out of my body. And I kept thinking eventually maybe I won't have to go back. And at one point, I was told I would forget a lot of my memories.
Mm.
And that really, really bothers me because the memories I have are just amazing. And when I think about it, it's like it's playing on a movie screen. I can feel the emotions of everything again. It's like I'm right back there. And I really do wonder I what was taken from me from that. At one point, I found myself in what I call the entrance to heaven, and I could see thousands and thousands of souls on each side of the entrance. There were no gates. It was just a very soft area. Again, it looked like if you were standing in clouds, but you didn't fall through them. It was just soft. And I was standing in front of these souls, and they were all wearing the same color of a beige robe, and their faces were so lit. It's like they were all energy, different kinds of energy. Each one had their own signature of energy. And I knew them. I knew that they were family, friends, relatives. Some had been born and died before me, but they were connected. They're like soul connections. And they had like this joyfulness about like they were welcoming me back home. And I knew if I got past a certain point, I wouldn't have to come back to my body. And so it became this game in a way to get past that point, like to kind of trick my guide. And so you telepathically communicate on the other side. You don't use words. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to tell him that I'm going to my grandma's garden and then I'm not going to come back. I just kept thinking, I'm home free. I've got to get past this point. And so I said to him, I'm going to go to my grandma's garden. And he said, you have to go back. It's not your time. And then I was immediately back in my body, like just slammed back in. And it hurt my heart so bad because I didn't want to be back there. And I felt like it was the last chance I had to stay out of my body. And I was fine with that. It probably sounds selfish, but if I would have been given a chance to stay in my earthly body or move on to what I call home, I would have chosen death. And it's not because I didn't have a good life. I have an amazing family, but it's like if you're on vacation for a long time and you're homesick and then you finally go home and everything's comfortable again. You feel everything's familiar. You're back with those your loved ones. That's what it felt like when I was out of my body. And I just craved that feeling of peace and love. And so at that point I was still kind of able to leave my body. It was over a 3-week period, but I knew that I wasn't going to be able to stay there. And so as I started to finally start to heal, suddenly one day I couldn't leave my body anymore. And I was really upset. I I was angry actually. But I did start to heal. And so after about 3 months, I was able to go home. And my dad would take me to physical therapy 3 times a week to learn to walk again. My hair that had fallen out grew back in. I had gone into the hospital weighing 94 pounds. I got up into like 163 pounds in water weight, and I went down to 79 pounds. So I remember my mom going to Kmart and buying overalls in the girls section. They were size 10, 12, because I couldn't fit into anything. I was so tiny. So over the next couple months, I did start to heal. And when I finally got up to 110 pounds, my doctor did the reversal surgery. He took out the colostomy bag and he did the J pouch surgery. And there was obviously complications because that's what I do. And so a big hole opened in my stomach. But I did actually start to heal. And so about a year after that, I decided to go back in and do one more surgery. It was kind of a tummy tuck. I had that long scar and I wanted to move it down when they fixed a hernia. And I wanted my belly button back. It was kind of off to the side. But I was still vain, I guess. But I went in and did the surgery and I did it outpatient because I was so terrified that they were going to keep me at the hospital, that there was going to be a problem. And they sent me home the same day. And I developed sepsis again. And so I knew the feeling like when I get that heavy fever that's so strong, high fevers. And so I called the on-call doctor and said I need to come in and drain the abscesses. I knew there was infection in my stomach. And I had a large scar, like a C-section scar from pelvis to pelvis, or from hip to hip, I guess. And so the doctor said, why don't you come in and we'll do surgery immediately. I'll meet you at the hospital. But my mom asked if she could have the local religious leader come and give me a blessing. And I said, yeah, it's fine. So they came to the house, there are 3 men, and they gave me a blessing. And as they were, giving me a prayer basically that I would be okay during surgery, I was laying on my bed and that pure love came back. And I thought, okay, I've completed whatever it is I'm supposed to do here, and I can go home again. And so I was watching the room. I was watching my husband talking with these people, and my mom was sitting next to me on the bed. And I said to her, I am leaving my body. I can feel myself leaving. And so she held my hand and she was crying. And I lifted about 5 feet off the bed, and I could feel the room fill with thousands of souls, angels, guides, family. It was just pure love. And then I was told this will be the last time that I would be able to leave my body, and that I was going to heal after that. And slowly I lifted down into my body again. And after the men left, I got up to go get ready. I went into the bathroom to grab my supplies, and I looked down and I had on like a tank top and my like leggings, baggy pajama bottoms, and my stomach opened up, a hole opened up in the middle of the incision, and the infection just started gushing out like a river. It was crazy, and it was everywhere. And as it did, I felt all the infection leave my body. I felt from my head kind of scanned my body, and I felt the health of my body recover. And I felt the fever leave, and I knew I was going to be okay. And so I called the doctor and I said, I don't need to come in. All the infection is out of my body. And he said, if you get sick again, if the fever comes back, call me tonight, but we'll check on you in the morning. And I never had to have surgery for that again. I recovered fully. Um, in the month before I'd done the surgery, we had done the foster care classes because I'd been watching TV one day and I heard that voice of my guide say, your body's not healthy enough to hold a pregnancy. You'll need to adopt. And I was like, yeah, that's very obvious to me. They cut all of my muscles, and I'd recovered well, but it just wasn't healthy for a pregnancy. So that we had started doing the foster care classes, and I had done the surgery to get ready for the classes. So the month after my surgery, about a month and a half after, is when our first foster baby arrived. And I had healed at such a significant rate from that surgery that I was able to lift her. She was 14 pounds or 14 months, sorry, and 25 pounds. And I could lift her and carry her. And this baby, it was like she healed my soul. And then my son that we adopted, he was the third baby that we had. And when I got the call about him, I heard my guide say, because they called about two children, a 6-week-old and my son. And I heard my guide say it's going to be the little boy. The little girl is going to go to her family. They have a 2-year-old sister. And so when I got the call for him, I didn't know if we would be adopting him. And it took about a year and a half. We did end up adopting him, and we chose an open adoption with his family. And so they are still part of our family. I adore them. I adore his mother. And then my daughter, she came a couple of years later, and I had had these experiences after my NDE where I could feel my guide, and he would communicate with me. And so I knew when things were going to happen sometimes for me. I never know what's going to happen in the world, but I'll know something's going to happen before it does. And so the morning that my daughter, the call came, I woke up that morning and knew that we were going to get a call for a baby girl. And so we had a boy room and a girl room. And so I got the room ready, and then I got the call that evening that we'd been chosen for her. And her case was a little bit different. I thought that we were just going to have her for a very short time. And her mom actually pulled me aside at one of her visits and said that she'd had an experience when she was pregnant and knew that she would not be raising her and that she would choose the mother that would, and it was me. And that was a really, really cool experience. And again, I adored my daughter's parents. They're not with us now. They passed on, but oh, I just loved them. And so we sat down with my husband and we kind of worked together to decide how we wanted this baby raised, what was important. And I wanted them involved. I wanted their family involved because even though they had some struggles that landed her in foster care, they loved her tremendously, just as my son's mom loved him. And I needed them to know that their babies were okay. And it was just very important that I knew also that their parents were okay. And so my kids are 21, my daughter's 21, and my son's 25 now. And it's been an amazing, amazing adventure. Especially sometimes I'll just look at them and think, wow, how are you this old now? I'm so grateful that I got to be their mom. And it was not to say without bumps. It was hard to raise my kids, especially
course.
Yeah,
Always is.
right. And I actually did divorce my husband when they were 7 and 11, and that was very unexpected and necessary. But we're good co-parents now. We get along really well, and I think that helped our kids. But
Yeah, I'm sure it did. Well, oh
yeah,
my gosh, this is a very, very, very detailed series of multiple NDEs. So I want to go back to several different things. So
okay.
I want to start with the multiplicity of them so that people who are watching and listening and understanding what these are, because I think for people who, especially when they're newer to this space, everybody wants to put a label on these. And we call a lot of things NDEs, sometimes that are not. But to me, when you were describing this, the way that you were describing it, you had a medical condition, you were septic, which for people who do not know, that's a massive infection throughout the entire body. The body shuts down, the organs shut down, people leave. And it felt to me as you were telling this story that you were just on the verge of dying, and then you would come back and you would die again and you would come back.
Yeah.
So, were you able to get confirmations from your medical records with how many times they revived you where you were truly gone?
So I requested my records a couple of years ago, and I know at the time that I was in the hospital, they were about this thick. Like
Oh my goodness.
they
Wow.
put them in my lap in the wheelchair at one point, and I thought, you need to read these. But there were so many thousands of pages. I mean, there were two huge books full of records. And so when I requested them, and I actually worked for an attorney that my job was to request medical records for personal injury. I knew what I was doing. It took me 6 months to get my records. I had to threaten a lawsuit with the hospital, and I had to walk the nurse or the person for medical records for my main surgeon. I had to over the phone tell her how to send my medical records because they were such a large file and she didn't know how. But the hospital shredded thousands of my pages of my records. And
Because
they said they kept them for 10 years, then they shredded them. But my feeling is there was some medical malpractice involved in my care by a specific nurse, and my family had threatened to send me to a different hospital unless she was off my care team because she was not safe. So, and one of the other nurses was also very abusive. So I I feel like the records disappeared because they didn't want a lawsuit. And that makes me angry because I know there was a lot more medical. Like I was supposed to have a liver transplant. And I told the doctor when he came in to tell me, I said, no, I know I'm going to be okay. I've been told that I don't need this transplant and I'm going to survive. And the medical term for it is primary sclerosing cholangitis. I think it's pretty significant. I healed from it, and I don't think you're supposed to heal from it. But there was definitely, I was in and out, just everything that could go wrong medically did. I was getting blood transfusions constantly. So the records I do have a lot of my medical care in there, and they'll talk about like the ARDS, the acute respiratory distress syndrome. There's a lot missing. And so when I wrote the book, I wrote it because I wanted my kids to know my story. And I had never told anyone the full story except for the ER doctor that checked me into the hospital. He was the first person that I told my story to. We had connected like 2 years ago, and it was just very random. And so I told him the story first, and he was very open to it because he'd had some really, really cool experience as well. He's very involved with ions, and so he was familiar with this. But I am angry that my records were ruined because no doctor will do surgery on me without them because they're so afraid of having any problems during surgeries. And so, if there's ever anything wrong, they don't want to do surgery. It's a liability.
oh, interesting. So the you described so many. I wrote down so many. I think that I counted like seven different separate experiences, just the ones that you felt were significant enough
Yeah.
to tell us.
Yeah.
So I love the first one where you were in the tunnel
Mhm.
with that gentleman who had a little bit of the Abe Lincoln, but the
Yeah.
kind eyes that you were really connecting with, and
Yeah.
how your cousin gave you the information about it being your great great grandfather. Were you
Mhm.
actually able to see a picture?
Yes.
And
Yeah, I can send it to you if you want.
Oh, no, I didn't mean it for that, but I mean like, and how did you feel when you saw
Oh,
that picture?
yeah. So my family's really into genealogy, and my mom she had access to an account that had all the family history in it. And my parents lived 10 houses away. So I like raced over to her house. I was like, open up your app with the genealogy on it and pull up this man's name. And she did. And as soon as I saw the picture, it was like, like I just knew. And he really does look like Abe Lincoln to me, the same kind of thin facial structure. And I said, send me that picture. Like, this is just incredible to me because, again, I never knew him in this life. And his daughter had passed away 2 months before I was born. But her husband was my great grandfather that was in the orbs and that was in the NDEs with me. So for me, it just shows that we almost have this, like, I guess you could consider it a soul contract with different souls that are in our group. And even if we don't live with them in this life, they're part of our core family.
Well, right. And of course, that makes so much sense to me, Heather, because you lived a lifetime well after your great
Mhm.
grandfather would have died. So before you even came into this
Yeah,
incarnation, you would
I
have
was
had
with
a
him.
connection on the other side, I think.
Yeah, I'm sure he was like, okay, time to go into this life. I'll see you in a little
Right.
bit. I'm like, okay,
Exactly.
bye. Yeah.
So I'm also curious when you're 19 years old, you know you're sick,
Mhm.
and you get that voice that says, you're going to die, but you're going to be okay. And it was a familiar voice.
Yeah.
Two questions out of that. Number one, why do you think you were given the information that you were going to die? And number two, did you ever figure out who that voice belonged to?
Yeah. So it's my guide.
It's your guide,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah. Same one that was with me throughout all of the experiences.
Hmm.
I think the reason I was given that is because I don't like surprises. And I
Who
think of
does?
it, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, right? Especially when you end up in a hospital for 3 months. And um, I think back to it now, like I didn't have kids at the time, but if you were to throw me into a hospital for 3 months, and back then, people didn't really have cell phones or laptops. I was kind of thrown out into the wild with no form of communication. We had regular landline phones. So I felt very pulled away from the world in a way. And now with our, technology and stuff, I think it may be different, but I would feel very alone at times when I was there. And especially after this happened, I felt like I had one foot in the door here and one foot not. And I didn't know a lot about NDEs, but I started reading every book at the library I could because I thought it was normal to have that many experiences, and I found out it wasn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not exactly.
Yeah, I was like, wait, is that all you, what happened next? So I don't know why I had so many, but I'm excited that I did because it changed my life profoundly. I'm not afraid of death at all anymore, and I was terrified. And I think also that's why I was given that reassurance that I was going to be okay. Because again, I don't want to drown or, get in a fire, a car accident or something. No one wants to die a scary way, but knowing that I would be okay. And I've had experiences since then where that guide has told me, if I'm going through something in my life, you're going to be okay. So it's like he's still reassuring me now with other things that it's going to be okay. Yeah.
There's so many facets to your NDE that I think are really helpful for people who are watching. You
Mhm.
mentioned a few minutes ago that you felt very alone.
Mhm.
Yet, in your experiences, you were shown multiple times that you were not alone. I think my favorite would have been so overwhelming. You're describing yourself being in the hospital room, and you know that you're fading, and all of a sudden you said, thousands of souls were in the room with you, filling the room with love,
Yeah.
connecting with you, letting you know that you were not alone. Another time, you were watching that other person that you knew was in the hospital dying, and you saw the angels not just assisting the person leaving the earth, but putting their hands on the
Yes.
shoulders of the family members. And I think that this is so comforting
Mhm.
because I think it is more the fear of being alone than it is of actually
Yeah.
dying alone,
Yeah. No one wants
or
to die
that
alone.
somebody lost somebody and that their loved one died alone. So
Yeah.
I would love for you to elaborate on that a little bit more because I just think that it's a gold nugget.
Yeah. So probably my favorite way to elaborate. I have an aunt that she kept saying, I'm gonna die in 4 years. She was completely healthy as my dad's sister. And we'd say, no, you aren't. And at the 4 year mark, she went to sleep and never woke up. And we found her, her family found her in her bed when they couldn't get a hold of her. And so for me, that my first thought was, this is very upsetting to me that she passed away by herself. And I thought, no, she wasn't alone. I have a huge amount of family that's passed on already, and I know that they were there to bring her back, and that she was enveloped in that love. And she passed away in November, so it's April now. She's come through a couple of times and been very, very strong. And the stuff she tells me, like she's she'll say, "I'm going to help you with this. I'm going to help your son with that." Like very significant things. And so she has a really strong energy that she's around. But I know that she wasn't alone. And so sometimes our first thought is when someone passes away, if we're not there with them, we think they were alone. I'm so upset that I wasn't there. We beat ourselves up for it. And I work a lot with the elderly population with I'm a notary, and so I do a lot of legal stuff with a couple of care centers. And there's something so special about our elderly. We need to give them more love. They're so close to the other side, to the veil, and I feel like they're just receiving the love, and they don't pass on alone. So sometimes if it's appropriate, we'll talk about what's going to happen next, and I'll tell them not to be afraid. We are not alone. I've been in hospital rooms of people that are near death, and again, you can feel that same amount of spirits and love. So it wasn't that I was special. I think everyone has it. We just
Yeah.
don't understand it a lot of the times. We don't.
Since you mentioned that you were experiencing things within the hospital in other rooms with other patients,
Mm.
to me, that's proof of evidential evidence that you can confirm after you're back of things that happened to other people.
Yeah.
So, will you share any of the evidential evidence that you were able to uncover when you came back from this experience that you could not have known about while you were dying and coming back?
I'm well, I guess I can tell you about some of the patients that were there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so the man that had visited my room, he had the same thing, a colostomy bag. He had the same medical stuff that I had. And so I would just kind of go to his room and check in on him because I felt close to him because he was suffering through the same hell that I was. And um, he just he had such a positive attitude. Like he told me at one point that he needed to survive. He had a family and that he needed to be there for them. Because my first thought was, I'm a gross monster. Now I have a colostomy bag attached to my body. I'm just hideous. I had a lot of really negative self-talk, and he helped me to appreciate that I'm more than what I look like, you know. But I was able to see him in his room with his family. There was another girl that was 17 that had had a baby. She had a C-section and had developed infections from the C-section. And I could see her in the room with her baby. She'd have family that would stop by. She was really young, 17, but she was in the shock trauma. All these patients were in the shock trauma. There's, the son or the boy that had been in the car accident. Another patient, she had fallen on the ice, and her husband was. So I'm from Utah, very, very Mormon. Her husband was. He ended up being the president of the LDS Church later on, and so she was there with her security entourage and stuff. But I could just kind of pop into the rooms and see these people. And it's funny because no one's ever asked me this before. But again, they had the spirits in their room too. Like they were not alone. And I always think of the young 17-year-old girl because, my kids are a little bit older than that now, but I think how scary that must have been for her to be that young and be away from her baby, her family taking the baby home with them, would bring it to visit. But I'm glad that she had the same spiritual love there to kind of guide her and protect her as well.
Well, how comforting though for everybody to know that. So, you said that you had this room with knowledge that you were in. The
Mhm.
room went on forever it felt ancient. You felt like you absorbed all this information and they told you you weren't going to be able to bring it back.
Yeah.
Have you over time remembered anything, any of that knowledge, been able to access it, incorporate it that you can share with us?
So I feel like that was the Akashic Records.
Me too.
Yeah, yeah, I truly do. And I think that I probably read through my life's contract for this life.
Mm.
And so I think that's why I wasn't able to remember it because I still,
Not necessarily information for the collective, but specific information that would ruin your experience if you knew in
yeah.
advance.
Yeah, because again, I don't like surprises. I would have been like, tell me everything. When do I die for real? So I think that's probably especially what was taken from me because I needed to go through trials. And this has not been an easy life, I have to say. I do still have some health struggles from time to time. And for the most part, I am healthy. I ended up having another abdominal surgery 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago. Um, so, every so often my body says, let's break it down again for a minute. But I do feel that it was definitely my life's soul contract and journey in that book. And maybe they gave me that little, you can look at it, but we're not going to let you keep it. So you can make these goals and go through the trials and learn from them.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So you also had that interesting room I've never heard anybody describe where there were a giant glass door, and it was understood by you telepathically that when somebody was going to die, the face of God would appear in that glass, and yet you saw it. But you saw God as the way that you described it, because you were talking about eyes, as a human
Yes.
figure looking God, which is very different than a lot of the NDEs. I've only
Yeah.
encountered that a very, very infrequent number of times. So can you share a little bit more about that experience and what you saw and felt?
Yeah. So I've asked people before they had NDEs, like, what did he look like to you? And I truly feel like he just put on, I call it a meat costume.
Yeah, yeah.
Some way that like that was his energy is what spoke to me. He could have been a, a tree or a child or an older woman, and I would have still recognized his energy as him. So I just feel like that was what he showed me, how he came to appear to me. And that isn't necessarily what he looks like all the time. But he had very iridescent, pearlish, like white hair, and kind of came to about right here. And then he had very like a goatee and a mustache, but it was very well trimmed. He was very well kept looking, and his face was very soft. He felt very, very ancient, but he looked very young. And I remember thinking, wow, he looks really healthy and almost like his face was pink, like like Santa Claus, and he's got that jolly little red face. That's what it reminded me of. And I still had my earthly thoughts throughout this, and I'm thinking, why is he here? That just really shocks me because I think if I hadn't had this experience, I wouldn't be, and I don't consider myself to be a part of any religion really. I'm just very spiritual, but I don't think that I would have any of that spiritual part of my life because if I hadn't had all these NDEs and out of body experiences, I would have been a very, very angry, angry person.
Because of the illnesses and the
Uh-huh.
health conditions?
Yeah, I mean, it took away my ability to have children. It's left health issues. I have bowel obstructions that just come out of nowhere. If I can drink water wrong and have an obstruction, I can go for a year and be fine, and then boom, I'm sick. So there's a lot that I brought back with me. I did not heal fully, but I feel like there's a lesson behind it. And I can understand it more because of those experiences. But if I was in my body that entire time feeling that pain on a consistent basis, I would have been a very angry and bitter person.
Well, I would love for you to share with people any encouragement, because I know that there are a lot of people who are watching who have pain,
Mhm.
issues, health concerns,
Yeah.
and it changes their life, especially when pain is involved.
Yeah.
And you said without this experience, you probably would have been bitter and angry. And I think there are probably people who are watching and like, well, why didn't I get that experience? But
Yeah.
what would you say to help people who are going through those understand maybe why they're having those experiences, whether they've been able to connect with something on the other side that's helped them the way that you do or not?
Yeah. So I actually spoke with a woman about 2 years ago whose daughter had passed away from something similar. And I remember her saying, why did you survive and she didn't? That is so unfair. And I was like, I agree with you. I don't know why I did. But I think I was, I didn't talk about this experience for 25 years in public. I didn't want people to take something that was so sacred and, um, just
Say
laugh off.
whatever mean thing they want to say in the comments. I
Yeah,
get
people
it.
are keyboard warriors.
Yes.
And this was something that was so special to me. Would
Yes.
only talk about it if someone brought up something that I felt like they needed that information. But when I was asked to speak about this the first time, I was terrified. And my guide had told me a couple months before, you're going to be speaking at Ian's meeting in November. And I remember saying to myself, like to him, like, shut the hell up. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm actually really shy, and that terrified me to speak in front of people. And I was shaking so heavily. But afterwards, the people came up to me and said, I needed to know that I'm going to be okay, that I don't need to fear death. I've been so afraid of dying. There are people that had medical conditions that were really, one of the men there, he'd been through multiple abdominal surgeries, and he said I needed that little extra pep, that little knowledge to know that I'm going to be okay. And I always say this too shall pass. Like when you're in that moment of pain, you're thinking it's never going to pass, and then it does. And so every time I'm in that cycle of having a health issue or something, I think this can't last forever. But when we're in the middle thick of it, it feels like it. And there are a lot of people with chronic health conditions, cancers, and they are struggling and they need that extra love and comfort. This is a harsh life for everybody. I don't think anyone gets out of it without hard trials. And so I always say my goal is to spread that love. And so I think me coming back, I was supposed to talk about the love from the other side and
Mm.
let people know that we are loved and we are known, and that prayer does work no matter if you're religious or not.
Yeah, I've heard that over and over again. That's definitely a central theme of these NDEs. The other thing I want to point out is that you, in your experience with God, there have been at least, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 people who I've interviewed who have had an experience where they encountered the entity that they identified as Jesus, who had eyes kind of what you described, where you could see the universe in them, that they were just beyond anything that was human. So, will you talk about the eyes a little bit more? Because that's a super unique experience as well.
Yeah. So I actually saw Jesus separate from God.
Oh, I don't think you mentioned that
I
part.
didn't, yeah. It was very quick. I was in my hospital room with my family, and I looked towards the window and I could see just from, like just his chest, like, just up above. And he was just standing there watching me. And I felt such immense love from him. He looked completely different than who I'd seen as God. He had dark eyes. And again, that same thing. It's like if you look at their eyes, it's almost like you speed through their eyes into the universe and you're in this vast open area of just, stars and just quiet. But it was immense love. And I remember thinking, I can't believe he's here. And I said to my mom, Jesus is at the window. And my mom told me later that's when she thought that I was going to die, that he came to bring me back home. And I felt like he was just there to comfort me, to let me know that he knew that I was struggling. He was aware of it and that he loved me. It was very short, just maybe a few minutes at the very most. But he looked completely different. Again, dark eyes. Um, his skin was darker and he had longer hair about here. It was dark. But again, same amount of love, just immense, immense love for me. Like he knew me and I was one of his loved ones. And I felt from both of them that we're all loved. We're all family when you think about it. We all come from the same source. And so when people are so hateful on this earth and they fight each other, I think, you are all, in the grand scheme of things, related. You're all family.
Absolutely. And you talk about the frequency, not only of the entities. I love that you said that God could have been anything, a child, a tree. It didn't have to be the human looking experience that you had because it was a frequency. And you also talked about the music and you said how the music was in everything. So anytime somebody brings up music, I always have to ask this question, which is, since you've been back, you've had 25 years to experience music here on earth. Is there anything that has even come close to what you experience with music on the other side that you found here?
So not as much. So, and I grew up in a very musical family. My mom played the piano and the organ. We constantly had people over with their musical instruments. And so when I came back from one of my times out of my body, I remember telling my mom music. I wrote down music and she turned on some church music and I was like, ah, shut it off. It's not it. It was like hymns. But the closest I've come to find here is certain types of classical music, um, like, different musical instruments that are harmonious together. I really like the piano guys and Greg Maroney. It's very soft classical. But I just love music in general. And so I like the bass and the beat of it. But I've never found anything like that because the music there is healing. I feel like it heals your soul and it's just full of life. It's hard to explain. It's just different frequencies of love. It's full of love and life and light, I guess. That
I
sounds
think
silly.
so too. I can't imagine this earthly experience without music.
Yeah. And I always think if I had to be blind or deaf, what would I want to be? I wouldn't want to be either because I have to hear music. I always have music on at my house. But I'm also a very much a nature girl. And so I'm always in the mountains. I'm always hiking. I'm always taking landscape pictures. And so we really have been given a beautiful existence to be in. I mean, if you are, watching the sunrise in the mountains, like there's nothing more magical than that. We really do have some really beautiful landscapes here
We
too.
do. I just got back from a trip. I was really fortunate to be able to see the Northern Lights in the Arctic Circle in Norway, and we were in Sweden when we saw them. But it was so magical the way that they moved. I mean, you always see these static pictures of them. To see them almost like they were living and breathing and moving was an extraordinary experience. We are so lucky. I think we become benign to whatever is around us. But
Mhm.
if we stop to really look, I always wonder now, like when you see a sunset or a sunrise, like how many people didn't even pay attention because we've seen
Yeah.
thousands of them.
And so every day I always, when I say my prayers, I say what I'm grateful for. And if I'm
Mm.
having a really bad day, I'm like, "Oh, well, I guess my lunch was good." I
You
like
can
my
always count on that.
right. I like food.
Me
But
too.
I always try to find something, and that's how I always start my prayers. And I pray for those because I felt like there was balls of light, and I had a lot of prayers happening for me when I was in the hospital. My parents' entire neighborhood, their church came together and did like a fasting prayer for me. I had prayer groups nonstop, and the way I saw it was like each prayer is like a ball of light that's taken and thrown up there. And it's almost like the angels and the guides are catching them to help us. And so we get angry when they don't answer our prayers. And I'm not perfect. Like sometimes I'll be like, I need my help with this. Where are you? But yeah, they're heard. Yeah, yeah. So I always
Heather, I have to share what just happened. I love it when this happens. When I'm doing these interviews, I have my phone, I told you, and I have a counter running during the interview so I know where to, find the intro or if I'm going to make a short from it. And I don't sit here and watch the clock at all, but every once in a while it gets my attention. And when you said these words about prayer, you called them balls of light. My attention was drawn to the clock and it was 1 hour, 11 minutes, and 11 seconds.
I was waiting for you to say that.
No way.
Yes, I'm
Stop
like it's
it.
11:11, right?
Yes, stop it.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
I was like,
It's
don't interrupt and be rude.
every time this happens, the person almost has an idea of what number. It happened the other day with 1 hour and 33 minutes and 33 seconds when she said this was meant to happen. And she was talking about a passed away loved one who died, and it was their number together.
Yeah, numbers are huge.
They are
Yeah,
huge.
and I like 111, 1111. Those are my numbers, like my angel
Me
numbers.
too. I
I
have a
could tell you,
UV tattoo that says 1111 on my
oh,
wrist.
nice. Yeah, I could tell you stories about that. Like I quit a job over that. I mean,
You wait a
yeah.
minute. Okay, I have
Yes.
to hear this.
So I had a job and I knew that I would be like my guide was telling me you're gonna be quitting this job soon. I started seeing 1111 and 111 everywhere. I started screenshotting and taking pictures of it, making little collages because there were so many of them. And I was like, this is significant. So I took my daughter on vacation. We went to the hot springs in Colorado. It's Glenwood Hot Springs. And as we're driving there, I hear my guide say, there's going to be a car accident. You need to be careful. And so I'm watching the entire time, waiting for it to happen. And I don't like driving. And that was a long way for me to drive. It was like a 6-hour drive. So as we're driving, this car clips the vehicle in front of it and starts flying through the air like this and lands on the other side of the road. And I'd been listening to the words of my guide saying, watch out, don't get near cars. And she was like, if I had driven a second faster, she would have hit my car and pushed us into the Colorado River. So we were able to help her. Her car was sideways on the other side, and a group of police officers that were training for disasters happened to be right there.
Of course they did. That
Right?
happens all the time too.
Yeah. So as I'm calling 911, they're extricating her, and she was just, young girl, but she survived. So we get to Glenwood, and as I'm sitting in the hot springs, I can feel my guide behind me, and he's telling me, this is the job you're going to get. This is how much you're going to make an hour. You're going to have to get insurance off the marketplace exchange. You're going to go in for the interview, and these are going to be the questions that your boss is going to ask you. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so specific. So I called my mom and I was like, write this down, see if it happens. And so when I got back, I started making sure that all my projects were done for my current job to quit. And I'd been there quite a few years. I was actually working in the foster care system. And from word of mouth, a friend said, they're hiring for this job. And I was told it would be in my neighborhood. I live in the mountains. There's one building in my neighborhood that you could work at, but it's rented out to different businesses. And so I said, okay, I sent the resume to this person. And when I went in for the interview, he's telling me specific things like, this is how much you'll make. You need to get insurance off the marketplace. Like just going through the list. It was like I was going click, click, click. And it all started with the 111s. So I thought, okay, I'm going to trust that there's something big coming. And so I did the interview and I quit my job before I even knew I got the job.
Oh my
And
gosh, that's
I worked there for
crazy. I love
years.
it.
Yeah, I
Crazy,
still,
like not crazy, right?
well, I mean, as a single parent, you don't just quit your job, you're with the state with health insurance and stuff. I had everything like unemployment or insurance and everything. But yeah, I still am in contact with this boss, and it was a wonderful job. And I wouldn't have probably been so ready to quit if I had had my guide showing me all these ones and 11s. I mean, it was crazy, hundreds of them, just
Wow.
constant. Wherever I turned, they were everywhere. So,
Well, so I'm glad that you're bringing this up. I have called 1111 the calling card of the universe. Tell us what you understand about these synchronistic numbers.
so for me, they're just guiding points. There's always a big change when they come. And it's almost like listen and watch because something big is coming, or you need to be aware and ready because I don't like change. I get very comfortable in my routine. And when something big is coming, I feel like they're sent kind of to say, okay, there's a big change coming. It's good. Be ready. But yeah, the amount of 111 pictures I had, I was like, every day I'd make 6 or 7 collages because I was like, this is crazy. But yeah, it's a
That's
big angel
amazing.
number. It definitely is. And I'm not the only one that sees it. I have a lot of people who are like, oh, there's my angel numbers. I'm like, those are mine.
I'm all right. So, people who are watching this right now, if you've gotten this far and you are a person that gets 1111, either share your stories or just write 1111 in the comments. I would love to see that. I think that that'd be super fun.
Yeah,
All right,
even
I want to
today,
ask
just driving my mom in her car, it was like 11:11. I'm like, look what time it is,
always. Yeah, I had a friend who called me today, and when I picked up the phone, she said something super significant, and I was like, oh, it's 3:33. There's your
Right?
confirmation.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask you one last question about your experience. There's probably so many more things I could ask, but I thought it was super cool that you kept seeing at 19 or 20 by the time this happened, your children
Mhm.
at the bottom, at the base of your bed, and you knew that they were going to be your children.
So I
So,
didn't go in the hospital.
oh, you didn't.
No, I didn't know who they were. Like we joke about it. Like, who are those white kids?
Oh, so at what point then did you understand? Was it after you had them, the foster children?
Yeah, so when I picked up my son, he had a hat on. It was winter time, and when I pulled it off, all that blonde hair came out, and I was like stopped in my tracks. I was like, that is the child. I didn't think I'd ever see them in this life. I just thought that they were there as a comfort, that maybe they were just two angelic spirits that were there to comfort me. I really didn't know who they were. So once I realized that my son was the first of those children, and I knew that he was older in the hospital by a couple of years, I thought, who's this baby girl? And so I had quite a few foster kids in between when my son came and when my daughter came. And I remember one day driving home from my grandpa's house, and saying to my guide out loud, like, where's this baby girl? I know she's out there. She has to be. I mean, my son is here. And hearing it's not her time yet. She's not ready. And so I just said, well, keep her safe until she gets here. And so when I got the call for her, she was a sickly baby. She was 11 weeks old and weighed 11 pounds. So there's your 11.
Oh my gosh.
But she had like this orange peach fuzz hair. And as her hair started to grow in, and her eyes, I swear her eyes spun like gray. She was so sickly looking. But she started to heal and get on the right formula as she started growing that blonde hair. And I was like, this is that child. 'Cause she was about 6 in the hospital and when I'd seen her. But yeah, she's got the blonde straight hair. And boy, that kid, she's a spitfire.
Wow.
She's, I mean, when she was like a year old, she would climb out of her crib, trash her entire bedroom, dump everything out, and then climb back in and put the blanket on and go to sleep.
Wow.
She's, I mean, when she was like a year old, she would climb out of her crib, trash her entire bedroom, dump everything out, and then climb back in and put the blanket on and go to sleep. I think this
She wore herself out first.
is wild.
It's
But yeah,
crazy.
I knew that she was the child. And so it was interesting to me. We had quite a few failed adoptions. And one of them, we were waiting for the call from the hospital. The mother was in prison to pick up the baby. And at the last minute, she gave the baby to a family member. We had everything ready. So it's funny to me that out of all these experiences, we only had those 2 kids. And I only saw 2 kids in the hospital. So I always knew that I was only going to have 2 kids. And
Wow.
that's how it worked out.
That's how it worked out.
Yeah.
Well, if you've gotten this far, I'm curious, what one of Heather's NDEs really resonated with you the most? I would love to hear. And if you don't know which one, you can write Waking Up the Collective. And then I know that you've gotten this far. But Heather, I would imagine that there are people who are watching right now who would love to get even more details from, we've had an hour and 20-minute conversation. And I know that there's so many more details of your NDE that didn't happen, which is why you wrote your book. So tell everybody about your book and where they can find it and how they could connect with you.
Yeah, so it's called Miracles from the Other Side. It's on Amazon. You can order it online through Barnes and Noble, Walmart, Target, wherever. It's everywhere. That was fun to write. I wasn't ever going to publish it, but when I started writing it, I knew that I would be publishing it, my guide, and that Raymond Moody would be giving the endorsement on the front cover. I could see the front cover with Raymond Moody's endorsement. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll start writing it. And as I wrote the book, all these people started coming into my life that were supposed to be a part of the book. And it was just, I remember writing, I'd write for hours and I felt like these downloads were just coming. It was so magical. And I wake up the next day and go back to read it because I felt like it was a very spiritual experience. And so, yeah, Raymond Moody did endorse the front. He's on the very top of it. He's
So awesome. I did not know
he's
that we had that
adorable.
in common.
Yeah.
He also wrote a jacket cover comment for my book.
Oh, isn't he the cutest thing ever?
I got to meet him in person in
Yeah, yeah,
Ions. Oh my gosh, what a wonderful man, and his wife and his son, like that, just a
yeah.
great family.
They are. They're so sweet. Yeah, we went to dinner a couple of times, and it was
Nice.
fun to get to know him in person more because he's the cutest thing ever. I just adore him.
You
But
too.
it was fun to write the book, and so when it came down to getting it published, my computer crashed at the last second.
Of course it did.
Everything was ready, and this is my Mac laptop that I was always like, "This is my baby. I love it." And I called my brother in tears and said, I think I've just lost the entire manuscript. I literally like finished it and it was ready to submit. And so my brother, who's amazing, the one that I talked about in the NDE, he said, come over and I'll fix it. And so we were able to get the manuscript back. But I had gotten to that point, I was like, I'm just not going to publish it.
It's a sign.
Yeah, I was like so over it. But yeah, he got it all back and it's selling really well. I have experiences with people that will just message me from other countries and we have these phone calls or email, exchanges back and forth. And so I've talked to people in like multiple countries, which
Wow. Well,
I
how can people
yeah.
reach you that way?
So a lot of them reach out through my website. It's heathervandermeyden.com. There's a
Let's spell it for everybody who's just listening.
Yeah, so Heather is Heather, and then Vandermeyden is Vandermeyden. So yeah, heathervandermeyden.com. And there's a contact button, and I always respond. It'll send an email to me, and then I always send it back. Sometimes it goes into people's spam folders, but within a couple of days, I always do respond. I've talked to people in Finland, Germany, Romania, um, gosh, Canada. Like it's been really, really fun. So
That's amazing. Well, I wanted to ask you one final question, which is, what do you feel that you know for sure?
that we don't die. When we leave this body, we just step into our next room, which is home. It's like we're walking from one door to another and we are still us. We still have our personality. We're still the same energy, just better. And there's so much love waiting for us, and we don't need to fear death.
That's so comforting. Well, Heather, I, for one, am so thankful that after 25 years of keeping this to yourself, that you felt compelled to begin sharing this because the messages that you shared today are so healing. And I want to thank you. Thank you so much for what you are doing to help wake up the collective. It is so needed right now.
It is. And I always just say we need more love in the world, more acts of service. Like, love your fellow people. We're not so different. We don't need to be so divisive.
Absolutely. And of course, this show is absolutely nothing without all of you who tune in to watch, to listen, and to share these beautiful experiences with somebody who needs it. And if you still have questions, you can join me for Wake Up Wednesdays live at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I'm Lori Micah. If you like stories that open your heart and expand your soul, hit subscribe. This channel is Waking Up the Collective.